On April 11, 1880, the legendary U.S. Army General William Tecumseh Sherman stood before 10,000 graduates of the Michigan Military Academy and uttered these few words: "War is hell." Rarely has such a complex subject been summarized so succinctly. Death and destruction, flying bullets and exploding shells, the screams of the dying and the silence of the dead, this is the only way to describe it. In the 14th century epic poem The Divine Comedy, Dante Alighieri envisioned the underworld as a vast pit composed of 9 concentric rings. In this spiral of damnation, punishments were arranged from lesser to greater by circles. If we take Dante's spiral of condemnation as a model, then the Battle of Ramree Island belongs to the 9th and most terrible circle, sometimes called the Ramree Massacre. Soon you will understand why. If this is your first time on the channel, subscribe now so you don't miss any important content about the darkest chapters of our history. The battle was a relatively small engagement that took place toward the end of the Burma campaign in the final year of World War II. In total, fewer than 1,000 soldiers lost their lives. But it wasn't the number of deaths that made this particular battle so terrifying. The soldiers were not killed by bullets, bombs, or bayonets. This is the chilling story of the Ramree Crocodile Massacre, the deadliest recorded animal attack in history. Stay until the end. Before the outbreak of World War II, Burma, now officially known as Myanmar, was part of the British Empire. However, they were expelled by the Japanese in 1942 at the beginning of the Burma campaign. The first step in the British reconquest would be to retake the capital, Rangoon, as part of Operation Dracula. But to do so, the Allies would need to base their vital air support somewhere. Ramree Island was chosen as a strategic location due to its proximity to Rangoon and its extensive land suitable for airstrips. For the assault, the initial Operation Matador began on January 14, 1945, with a landing on the northern beaches of Ramree. The British Navy had observed the Japanese soldiers preparing for the invasion by installing artillery in caves along the coast. HMS Queen Elizabeth and other Allied ships successfully eliminated these positions. By nightfall, the British had secured the island with little resistance. The next day, the port was captured, and the Allies advanced south. However, this time they encountered fierce resistance from approximately 1,000 Japanese troops, who fought like tigers to defend every inch. As all the British forces were concentrated across the island, it became clear that Japanese resistance was futile. At this point, Japanese General Kenichi Nagasawa had a decision to make. Most military leaders would have simply waved the white flag. But by this stage of the war, the Japanese had made it very clear that they would rather die than suffer the shame of surrender. In this case, however, there was a third option: escape. If Nagasawa and his men could somehow reach the mainland, they could regroup with the remaining forces of the Japanese army. There was just one small problem with this plan. Between the general and the mainland lay a vast mangrove swamp, a nearly impenetrable labyrinth of trees covered in thick mud that oozed with high tide water. Now comes the interesting part. This hellish labyrinth was infested with tropical diseases carried by mosquitoes, venomous scorpions, and spiders, and worst of all, abundant saltwater crocodiles. In general, it did not sound good. But on the plus side, the swamp was so dense that Japanese troops would be nearly invisible from both land and air. It was so dangerous that the Allies surely wouldn't dare follow them into the interior. In early February, the Japanese abandoned their fortified positions on the island and ventured into the swamp. Most would never reach their destination. Saltwater crocodiles, ambush predators, wait motionless for hours, and despite their size, they can be practically invisible in just a few feet of water. If something appetizing comes too close, they strike and clamp down with a lethal bite, tearing apart whatever they have in their jaws into bloody pieces. The Japanese soldiers of Ramree entered the mangrove in terrible conditions. They had been fighting non-stop for weeks, and many were sick or wounded. They never realized the monsters that were stalking them. Crocodiles mainly hunt at night, and as the soldiers ventured through the jungle, they were devoured one by one. It is difficult to imagine how terrifying it must have been. One moment you are quietly walking through the swamp in the moonlight, and the next, something enormous moves in the darkness, and you are dragged under, caught in the cold jaws of a creature large enough to literally swallow you whole. Some of those who were there to witness this horror firsthand wrote accounts of what they saw. Among them, the naturalist Bruce Stanley Wright, a lieutenant commander in the Royal Canadian Navy, recorded his description of the crocodile massacre in his 1962 book Wildlife Sketches. According to him, that night was the most horrific for any member of the army. The sound of rifle shots was interrupted by the screams of the wounded being crushed in the jaws of the enormous reptiles, creating a hell rarely seen anywhere else on Earth. At dawn, vultures arrived to clean up what the crocodiles had left behind. Nearly 1,000 Japanese soldiers had entered the mangroves, and only the vultures remained to bear witness to their fate. But to our surprise, in recent years, both historians and herpetologists specializing in reptiles have begun to question whether this horrifying story could really be true. After all, it sounds more like something you would see in a movie theater than on a battlefield. So what really happened on Ramree Island 80 years ago? The problem is that such a mass crocodile slaughter could only have been possible if the swamp had been filled with thousands of extremely large saltwater crocodiles. However, there is neither the food supply nor the space to sustain such a high density of mature adults in the island's mangrove. In short, the legendary story of the Ramree crocodile massacre is an ecological impossibility. In 2001, pathologist and massacre skeptic Stephen Platt made a discovery about Wright's account. If this story shocked you and you want to know more, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss what comes next. In Wright's book, almost all the wildlife anecdotes are written from his perspective, but the chilling story of the crocodile massacre is written in the third person. It turns out there is an important reason for this. Wright was not actually present when the supposed massacre took place. His version of events is based on conversations he had with those who were there, and it is possible he embellished some details along the way. But there is something even more interesting about Wright's account. He never explicitly stated that all the soldiers were killed only by crocodiles. 1,000 entered, and only 20 came out alive. In conclusion, the story of the Ramree crocodile massacre has captured the imagination of many due to its eerie nature and the accounts of survivors. However, when analyzing the facts, it becomes clear that reality may be less spectacular than what has been told. The extreme conditions of the mangrove, with its sticky mud, brackish water, tropical diseases, and dangerous fauna, already posed a formidable challenge for the Japanese soldiers. The story of Ramree makes us reflect on the brutality of war and how it often unfolds in unexpected and deadly settings. No matter how many soldiers died at the hands of crocodiles or from other causes, the essence of the tragedy remains. Men trapped in a desperate situation, fighting for their lives in a hostile and terrifying environment. If you've made it this far and learned something new from our stories, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. Together, we can uncover and remember the truths that history often tries to hide.